football coach. So let's start with Baylor football. They start spring drills. We have discussed this a little bit. Travis wrote around with us last week as well. But here's what I'd like to know. How do you get that edge, that whatever that was a couple of years ago when you play with your hair on fire? That, you could say that's experience or just better players. Can they get that back? How do you get that back?
I mean, I think before they find the edge, they have to figure out what's potentially 8 new starters on offense. I mean, the entire offensive line is going to be new. So I think it kind of starts with them. I don't think they really had it last year like they did. I mean, they played fine. I just don't think that they played at the elite level they played at the year before. But, you know, they've got 5 new starters in the offensive line. They're going to have a new tight end. They're going to have new wide receivers. There's potential that they have a new quarterback if Sawyer Robertson, beats out Blake Shapen. I don't think that that's likely, but even still, there are so many different things to have before they can get that edge back. They got to figure out who's actually going to be leading the way to get it.
Well, I think they kind of play hand in hand, don't they? I mean, the people who are leading the way are probably the ones establishing your edge for you. So I think that last year that they had quote-unquote leaders, but they weren't leaders in the way that an Abram Smith or a Jalen Petrie or a Terrell Bernard or those guys were the year prior. They also hadn't been on campus for 5 and 6 years like those guys had. So I don't know. It's an interesting mix of guys, of veterans, of young guys, of transfers. I mean, it's not just we sprinkled in a couple of transfers. They brought in 10 transfers. I mean, that's significant. That's a number of players. That's half of a recruiting class that you brought in that's played 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 years of college football already elsewhere. So they're going to have to get the culture part of it down, and I'm sure that's what they've been working on, these last couple of months. I think just continuing to instill that and kind of who they are and their brand is going to be, heavily important, especially in mixing in these new guys and these new young guys, and having them, know the ways along with the guys who have been on campus for 2, 3, and 4 years. But yeah, they need somebody to step up and not just bark, but have some bite with it. I don't think they had anybody really with any bite last year. I mean, they might have had some guys who on their own made some unique plays or on occasion made a dominant play, but they didn't have any dogs like the week in and week out type of guys who you knew no matter what, 4th down and inches, we know we have a chance. We know we have a chance. We might not stop them, but we know we have, and we believe that we can stop them. And I don't know that they always believed that last year, or at least, even if they did, just the execution piece wasn't there. So new faces on the staff, new faces on the roster, some old faces that we learned from the roster that's come out. Grayson pointed out some guys who are no longer on there. So it's going to be very interesting because I do feel like there is a unique pressure on Dave Aranda this year, not to go and win the Big 12 again or reach 10 wins necessarily. But I said this earlier. I think Garrett agreed with me. I think Grayson did too. But last year was hard to watch. I know that teams have down years and teams go 6 and 7, but that was hard to watch after a while. I mean, would y'all agree with that?
Yeah.
I mean, it just felt like you were running in mud.
It was a little bit better version and not quite as awful as 2020.
But 2020 had reasons.
Yeah.
Had more reasons as to why that was like the way that it was, I feel like. Whereas last year, there was some reasons for why they weren't as good as a Big 12 championship team, and a lot of that had to do with some of the names that I just mentioned. Tyquan Thornton you could add in there, and others as well. But you could never get fully behind this team, if that makes sense. You could never fully just start to all right, let's ride, baby. We just won a game. It's like next week, loss, and then another loss, and then you'd win a game, and then you'd lose again. It was so up and down week by week that it was like walking on pins and needles, wondering what this team was going to show up and perform like, and that was tough. So I'm hoping that now they kind of got that bad taste out of their mouth. Now we know a bit more of the reason why. Clearly behind the scenes, even on the staff, there was some level of a lack of chemistry. They've changed that over. Let's see if that makes a big difference. I believe that it should, and obviously they believe that it should as well.
All right, so we have that, and Craig will be in and out today with so there's no off the radar, but he'll be headed over to the Baylor football practice facility in a little bit, and of course they may be indoors. We'll see what happens there, so we'll start to have some of that, and then after practice there's immediate availability at times, depending on whether it's Dave Aranda and or coaches and or players who will be a part of it. And by the way, I sent an email last night. I was going to send it on Sunday night, but I sent it last night. I tweaked a little bit to all 14 schools, including Baylor, but all 14 schools, media relations as far as trying to see, of the 14 schools, how many of the head coaches will get over the next 2 to 3, 4 weeks during the time that spring drills and eventually spring games are being done. And then, of course, we'll check in with UTSA, with Jeff Traylor, and we'll check in with others, including, of course, the other coaches around the country who we will get on this show.
Yeah, it'll be fun to get into spring ball. I do want to go ahead and tell you now, because it's a conversation we'll be having off air. I finally did look up. We did not have any of the assistants on this time last year.
Okay.
We haven't talked to Eric Mateos or Jeff Grimes in like a couple years.
Well, no, we had them. Did we not have them not last year at all?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Not based on my note. They might have done a practice session, but we did not talk to them on this show.
Yeah, I'm trying to
the last time I looked, Mateos, Grimes, that was all like March, April of 21. Based on like as far as on this show. Now they definitely have done a post-practice session, but that's not what you asked me about.
No, I asked about segments where they appeared on the show.
We haven't had that in a couple of years. So that I wanted to pass that along because we've been talking about that because we're trying to make our plans for spring. And now that it's on my mind, but I did mention the roster attrition, and I know that there's probably going to be more of this, but one name that is of interest because it's been talked about a lot, Tay McWilliams, no longer on the roster. I don't know if you guys saw that or not, but he obviously had a couple, or at least one head injury last year and then missed most of the year, and everybody was kind of wondering, what his status was. Well, apparently he's not on the spring roster that was released. There were some other names as well that are like Javon Gibson, young wide receiver, no longer on the roster. So that's what you start to get this time of year, and that's just of note. But, yeah, that answers a question that I know had been out there for a while.
All right.
I think it was going to be tough for him to really crack the rotation, looking at what they have. I mean, like, just in the top two guys, Richard Reese and Dominic Richardson, now you've got guys that, have played a whole lot more than you have. And that's not even getting into who else is there. Right. So, yeah, there's just a lot of that would have been tough. So doesn't surprise me, especially given off the fact that, Cup, he had the concussions last year and all that he went through.
So you think he's out? Do you think he's no longer with Baylor because of health, or do you feel like he just needs a breath of fresh air?
I think it probably all intersects together.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'd rather not speculate.
No,
I don't know.
I agree.
I think just based on what we saw last year, if you were to be told that head injuries did it, would you be surprised? Absolutely not. So, I don't know. Maybe he pops up on a spring roster somewhere else, but that was clearly something he was struggling with. It's something you don't play around with, especially as a running back. So, yeah, I don't know, but that clearly could be why. But he was one of those names, as I mentioned, Javon Gibson, young wide receiver, who I really had high hopes for. Grayson, I think, also mentioned Cisco Caston on there, no longer on there as well, and Victor Obi, the linebacker from previously Kilgore College a couple years back, no longer on the roster as well. So everybody who's following college football, I'm sure, is doing the same thing and seeing the spring roster released and cross-checking it from last year and the early enrollees and all of that. So those are just a few of the names that have been notable.
I'm glad you guys did that because I did not until I actually had one in my hand, but I'm glad you did that.